There's a television show that is done, no longer running new series, but it's titled Monk. I'm curious if I have any fellow Monk fans out there. Yes, love it. It's like a mystery comedy drama. It's not really important, but it features a main character named Monk, and he has obsessive compulsive disorder and is afraid of 312 things, precisely. I looked it up. He works as a private consultant for the police department, helping them solve crimes. And his OCD and his phobias cause lots of problems for himself and for the investigations. But it is these very same things that cause problems that aid him in solving cases. His sharp memory, specific mindset of just how he sees a scene, and his attention to detail are just a couple of the things that help him be really good at solving crimes. So throughout the 8 seasons, the point of me telling you about this, there is a point. Throughout the 8 seasons, you hear him describe his struggles over and over by saying this phrase. I'm curious if anybody remembers what it is. He says about his condition, "It's a gift and a curse." It's a gift and a curse. And that's kind of how he says it too, if you've ever watched Monk. And that, in a nutshell, is the thesis of what I want to say today about the feeling of disgust. It can be a gift and a curse. Disgust is described as the feeling or expression of strong disapproval. Thank you, Jeff, for that. Disgust includes everything from the feeling you get when you're served your least favorite food or something you wouldn't even imagine eating, all the way to witnessing or experiencing maybe an injustice or a wrongdoing, something that you feel great disapproval of. And there's lots of things in between that continuum, between "ew, that's gross," and a grave injustice. And it's a feeling that is both a gift and a curse, depending on where it takes you next after you experience it as a feeling. And today we experience Jesus in that very situation. Now, of course, we don't actually know if what he felt in the moment was disgust. It does not use that word in the scripture, perhaps. But reading the story, learning some cultural context, observing his actions that come next, we can reach the conclusion that likely there was some disgust involved, that Jesus is feeling some real disapproval in this situation. To be clear, nothing that happened in this scene was inherently wrong, okay? So it was common for things to be sold in and around the temple, and in fact it was necessary based on the system of the day. And since this passage tells us it was almost Passover, people would be traveling to Jerusalem, and since it's difficult to travel with animals, they would need to buy the animals once they arrived in order to sacrifice them for worship. So those coming to the temple needed this service. They needed to buy animals that they were expected then to sacrifice. So that's why the temple was a bit of a barnyard this particular day. Additionally, the temple tax had to be paid in specific temple coinage. So the money changers were also expected to be there, and they were necessary. So again, on the surface, none of this is fundamentally wrong. So where does this reaction from Jesus come from? I'm going to provide 4 options that he's perhaps feeling disgusted about. The first possibility is that in the other gospel versions of this story, this doesn't come up in John, but in the other 3 gospels, it hints at price gouging. They use the phrase den of robbers in these other gospel versions, implying that people selling the animals or changing the money might be dishonest or cheating their customers. So this would certainly be worthy of disgust. 2, another option is simply that they're choosing to do business at all within the temple walls. That they perhaps forgot back in Old Testament scripture reference that says, "Stop making my Father's house a marketplace." So Jesus could be referring to that. Number 3, still another option, is the fact that there was an assumption that this buying and selling, so these coin money changers, and people selling the animals were set up in a place of the temple known as the court of the Gentiles. So Gentiles were made to stay separate from Jews, and so there was an assumption made that this is where this was taking place. And since they're made to keep separate from the Jews, is it possible that Jesus is disgusted by the fact that the Gentiles are being robbed of like the one and only area in the temple that they're actually allowed to enter and pray? And finally, another option. Jesus might be critiquing the entire sacrificial worship system. All these animal sacrifices were the old way of showing devotion, making confession, the old way of finding forgiveness, offering praise to God. These old ways and old laws were no longer relevant with the arrival of Jesus. With Jesus, the kingdom had come in a new way, and they didn't need cattle and doves and sheep, and they didn't need the correct coinage. Entering the temple, everything on the surface looked like they were doing church correctly. But upon closer inspection, Jesus finds that perhaps they've forgotten their purpose or their focus. The temple had been taken over by these buyers and sellers and consumers and marketers, people who knew how to fill the pews and meet the capital campaign goals. And herein lies the choice that Jesus had, the gift and the curse, if you will. Jesus could observe this situation and feel disgust and disapproval and respond in one of two ways. One, walk away, maybe build some bitterness that people don't get it yet. Maybe go find the disciples, complain to them, create some resentment in the group, a little negativity builds. Or Jesus could take action and be part of the change. And of course, we know that Jesus chose this option. Jesus created some holy havoc. Turning tables over, I imagine coins bouncing across the floor and animals, maybe scared, running around. Jesus shows up and said, "Stop trying to do this yourself. Stop trying to earn grace. Stop trying to deserve love." He's done doing the math. He's done counting coins and cattle as a way of doling out forgiveness and grace and love. He essentially brings the focus back to where it should be. And even though it's sometimes hard to hear, and sometimes it catches us by surprise, Jesus is forever reminding us to bring our focus back to where it belongs. And of course, the scripture goes on to, they can't just accept Jesus' actions, they have to question him. And he responds with this whole, destroy the temple and I'll raise it in 3 days, which they take quite literally. But he is, again, speaking of himself and his coming death and resurrection, taking the focus back to a very brand new way. And so I guess this is my question to you. What do we do with our own feelings of disgust? I think we also have two options with this emotion. It's a curse, so to speak, when we take that feeling of disgust and we allow it to fester. We might talk to others, we might spread negativity and poison, we might build up resentment in ourselves. And it's a gift when we take that feeling of disapproval and we enter into the work of action and change. When we say, I want to be part of the solution, that there has to be a new way and that I'm willing to work at it. I thought a really long time this week about when in my life I have felt most disgusted. What are the things besides like snakes and olives that I view with extreme disapproval? And then, full disclosure, I wrestled with the decision to tell you about the times when I have felt disgust and just used it to build resentment, or whether I should find something that I've worked at changing, but then that could come across as like tooting my own horn. I chose to toot my horn. And you'll just have to trust me that at least half the time I do allow feelings of disgust to build bitterness and resentment. Don't worry. So the thing I thought of was this, and another disclaimer is that I know it's weird to think about this thing as in a way of like being disgusted at it, okay? So maybe it's easier to think of being filled with disapproval or dissatisfaction. So I hope you can go with me here, but something that gets me at the core, something I'm consistently dissatisfied about, is loneliness. So it's my own loneliness, it's your loneliness, other people's loneliness. I've experienced it myself differently throughout my life. So, not always fitting in as a kid, being in a different life stage than my fellow peers, being home full-time with 3 babies, very lonely. Being so scheduled and so busy that there's no time left for connection is also a form of loneliness. And I've watched this play out in the lives of others as well. Just this week, I read this quote that said, "Loneliness harms both individual and societal health. The harmful consequences of a society that lacks social connection can be felt in our schools, our workplaces, and civic organizations where performance, productivity, and engagement are diminished." I would add churches. The current crisis of loneliness is inherently linked to the crisis of cultural and political polarization, a crisis that is tearing both families and faith communities apart. This is one of my things. It's one of the things that I experience and I observe in others, and it makes me want to flip tables, so to speak. And so my whole life, I've been faced with 2 choices: bitterness and resentment, or action and change. And when it comes to loneliness, I have often chosen to be the change. A couple examples. I helped to start a preschool co-op with some other moms and toddlers a long time ago who couldn't afford preschool. It was not part of our budgets, and we were tired of being home alone with the babies. During the time that I was not on staff here at Silverwood, there was a time period where Dallin and I made lunch every Sunday in the fellowship hall and invited young adults to come eat with us. There was a season where we ate supper every Monday night with another family. A season where we ate every Friday night with another family. One January, when Dallin asked me the dreaded question of, what is our focus this year? Dreaded because I have learned that I live solidly in the present and future visioning is hard. But that particular year, we chose hospitality. And what that meant for us was that rather than travel or saving or house projects, our extra money that year generally went towards groceries because we were constantly inviting people over to eat with us and sit at our table and share a meal. There was nothing perfect about any of these experiences, not at all. And it did not solve the epidemic of loneliness, but it was a start. When I feel lonely, when I observe loneliness in others, I can tend to turn inward. But it is always richer and more life-changing to do something about it instead. And dare I say that in doing something about it, I think it points towards Jesus. Now, it doesn't have to be loneliness. This is not supposed to be a sermon about loneliness at all. It's my example. It's something that burns in me and causes me to feel great dissatisfaction. So today my question is, what is that thing for you? What brings up your feelings of disgust or disapproval? And then what does that disgust do for you? Does it build resentment or does it spur you to action? Do you allow it to feed bitterness in you or do you allow it to point back to Jesus? I read somewhere this week, and I can't remember the quote, so I apologize for whoever I'm stealing it from, but they said that the opposite of love is not rage. The opposite of love is indifference. And so my prayer is that when we feel disgust, we can choose love over indifference. Where are we being called to do some spring cleaning or to create some holy havoc? I'm going to have the music team just pause a little bit before they come up because I want us to sit just in silence for a bit this morning. What comes to your mind first? What might be God calling up in you today? I just want you to sit in silence and think of that thing, and then the music team will lead us in responding in song. Thanks.